and as Hunter pointed out, clearly one of the major drivers is being here, the population growth and the cost with the benefits and the personnel to be able to accommodate that. The other point we've done, I've wanted to expand our circle of advisors, and so Hunter and Lisa and I are going to each of the schools to work directly with the principals for me to get a better understanding of what it is that their true needs, and not just that it's on paper, because they are obviously our first line of communication of information, as well as a communication with their parents and constituents. And we completed that with the elementary principals, because one of the things I was interested in not only was the increase of enrollment and some of the requested additional staff, but what does that mean with regard to cost of supporting that? Do we have room? Or Mount Daniel, would we have to add another trailer? And what is the cost? And some of those things were not necessarily factored in the original early budget. Tomorrow, going to Henderson and the high school, because I want to bring the principals into this fold, because we need their valuable insight. The key that I think is, as we'll show in the next slide here, Hunter, is much like the city, the best guess estimate that we have at this point is what the fixed costs are going to be with regard to benefits and retirement and health insurance. Nearly $900,000, give or take. Now, Hunter, how comfortable are you with those numbers?
Comfortable to the extent that there should be asterisks up by the VRS and the health insurance. Those could very well change. As we discussed earlier when the auditors were here, the VRS retirement increase, this is a result of accelerating the fully funding of what the VRS board and actuaries had recommended back in 2012. This was an initiative of Governor McAuliffe. If, for example, the governor recommends and the General Assembly approves, or even if the governor doesn't recommend and the General Assembly goes ahead and listens to the pleas of localities and goes ahead and reinstates the original plan, this $450,000 item could go to zero. But we don't know that at this point. We'll know if the governor is including it probably, we will know whether he's including, what rate he's including by mid-December, probably in about 2 weeks. And then we'll know what the General Assembly action is, because this is a short session coming up by the end of February. So we hopefully will know that by the time that the school board would adopt its budget request. Likewise, Melissa and I have been working together with the health insurance, and the 439, the 440 here represents a 15% increase. God bless you. Mm-hmm. I'm cautiously optimistic that this will come down for two reasons. One, going back and doing some analysis on last year's health insurance, and because we were previously with the Council of Governments with United Healthcare and then had switched over to local choice, I went back and modeled to say, what if we had stayed with the United Healthcare, with COG, and then built in their rates plus their average increase over the previous years, and believe it or not, we would still be better off cost-wise with the local choice program. It was still slightly less than what the premiums would have been under the modeling assumptions, and the information that we're getting right now, it's a little fuzzy. Melissa and I and our HR folks are putting our heads together, and I think we're going to be placing some phone calls. On the one hand, we're being told that our experience this year is very similar to the experience last year, which on the one hand says, it hasn't gone crazy and done something different. So there seem to be some trends there. The question becomes, will a rate increase be necessary in order to continue to make up for the deficit in the previous year? But like I said, we should know something by February about that. The other items, the VRS life insurance, the city retirement, and the other benefits, are pretty much knowns at this point. The other benefits, as Melissa said, the reduction there is primarily because of the retiree health insurance and the change in the assumptions there, and the city retirement increase as well.
So the amount of elasticity in this area is going to be floating for a little bit, much like at the city. We have to work that, but I think we're all looking at least the starting point from which we have to plan, for which we have very little flexibility. It may, what would you say, variance? At best, 10%?
Well,
15, or even more, because
the odd thing is, if the VRS is, if you make an assumption, it's either going to be $450,000 or nothing.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
That's a huge difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Much like the city, you have the key budget driver where, for general government, you want to provide competitive compensation. My board has also identified the fact that there is a range in which they would like to see the competitive compensation with regard to on the salary guides compared to other school districts. So that enters into it. So, the bottom line comes down to what we're seeing here is that obviously our collective needs are greater than what we probably will ever see to be able to be funded. But if indeed we are sticking with the notion of almost $900,000 for the base benefit and insurance package, how then do we address the competitive salaries? For an example, just a step increase for administrators, support staff, and professional staff is almost $1 million. Just a step increase. $988,000 is projected out. A 1% adjustment to all salaries is another $374,000. It can go on. Well, clearly, we're now beyond what may be the revenue base. And that's assuming that everything else remains static in next year's budget as it is today. No additional staff for some of the ballooning class size grade levels, and certainly what has not been adjusted for a period of time, and which our principals know that quite well, are the materials and supplies in some of our areas. Without getting into other needs and wants to expand program, to maintain and enhance an already outstanding program that you have, that's what we're facing preliminarily. The need for adequate classroom materials and supplies, very critical. To maintain competitive staff salaries, and obviously to address the staff services due to student enrollment growth. These are the areas that my board is going to be wrestling with as we start next week. The budget that we are going to put together is the board's budget. It's certainly not the interim. My short time here doesn't mean that I have ownership. I'm in support of the board. It's their ownership of the budget. By the time a permanent superintendent is on board, likelihood she or he will have little or no input into the budget. So it is indeed, and for fiscal year 18, the board's budget. And tomorrow night we will be getting our direction from the board in terms of how best we can serve their needs in order for them to be able to present to you their fiscal year 18 budget.
Just a quick question. The school cost driver slide for $890,000, there are other cost drivers that may be mandated by law in addition to these, correct?
That is true, especially in the area of, say, special ed tuition and services. And I can think of some other areas as well. But these are those to which we can assign at this point, given certain assumptions, a price tag. So I think those other items to which you refer are on the next slide, which basically fall under the student enrollment growth, making sure that we have the staff and the services necessary, or in some cases are mandated or required.
But those, just to be clear, those could be a couple $100,000 as well.
Easily.
So they're not,
easily.
because they're people largely.
Right. But I, at this point, cannot assign a dollar value.
Understood.
On that note,
On that uplifting note,
to continue on to what Bob mentioned earlier. So this is just one illustration of what we're dealing with. So if we take our total revenue growth of $2.5 million, we take out the requested recommended PAYGO capital maintenance of $600,000. Right, it'll be split 50-50, but we take it off the top. Debt service of $120,000, which was from what we issued earlier this year. And we're also making an assumption or a decision to put in to withdraw not withdraw, but to reduce our retirement contributions by $143,000, representing the pension dividends that have been earned on the $9.2 million over the last 2 years. That's FY15 and FY16 earnings.
What's that breakdown into an annualized return?
Less than 1%.
Yeah, and it's important to realize when the decision was made to invest in the pension fund, markets were at all-time highs. Then they dropped, and then they got back around June 30th of this year. We got back to all-time highs, and so that's really the trajectory that they've been on. They kind of went down for 12 months, and then they came back up. So this is obviously lower than the average returns that we'll see from the pension over the long haul, but this is the net result. This is the ROI of that investment to date.
If we take all that into account, we will have
With that pension dividend, I thought that was all going to go to pay capital.
Well, so we've put it right next to debt service, just for illustrative purposes. Now, notionally, it was actually dedicated to the Mount Daniel project, or at least at the time that was on people's minds when that decision was made. We've been paying Mount Daniel debt service now for 18 months, and so at any rate, it is a cost reduction, and we put it side by side with the debt service figure.
So the remaining funds for operations, available funds for operations, is slightly under $1.9 million. Now, we take that against what we've heard previously on the general government side of about $740,000 in known costs without any increases in staff or programs or any increase in staff compensation. And on the school side, $890,000, similarly without any increases in staff compensation or programs. And our net available funds for anything new would be $234,000.
Ms. Ryman, did that include the WMATA costs?
Yes, our $740,000 did include it. That did not include any capital reserve funding that we may wish to pursue early in order to fund a planned high school, middle school development. So there's a decision to make here. You can, as Wyatt alluded to earlier, you can begin to build reserves early in fiscal year 2018 rather than fiscal year 2019, is what one of the models showed. Now, debt service, if we issue in FY18, the first debt service on that will potentially begin in FY19, and that's on the $10 million that we had projected. So only a small portion of it will show up in FY19. And this represents basically 50% of the FY19 projection of what's needed to put into the reserves. So we had included 8 cents, and this is 4 cents. So if you begin in early in FY18, you could potentially do 4 cents. And then another 4 cents, not cumulative, in FY19.
Ms. Ryman, this pre-funding, is that just school construction?
Well, that's pre-funding to set we would set aside all the receipts of that tax increase and put that into capital reserves for the project. We wouldn't spend any of it.
Right, but I'm saying, is it, you're earmarking, what I'm saying is that all that is going towards school construction?
Yes.
But there's nothing for CIP for the city or?
Now, this would be purely a strategic investment to begin to pre-fund the high school project. That's what this is put out here for. And so we put it out here for a couple of reasons. One, I think we're talking about an FY18 budget. We've got a lot of tough decisions to make, and we're going to work through those as we always do. But just thinking about where we're going to be next year at this time, and we're thinking about this big capital lift that we're going to be have right on our plates at that time. 4 cents is half of it. And so what we're proposing here is just to start thinking about is you could do that in 2 steps, 4 cents this year, 4 cents the next year. None of these are going to be easy decisions, obviously.
Why, did the 8 cents that we talked about in the model include City Hall and the library in there?
Yes, that's the full CIP.
So if we did 4 cents now, then the 4 cents, say, the next year, that would take care of the library and City Hall and the rest of Mason?
What's that blue?
To 8 cents total, not 8 cents plus, because I think the library was like 1.5, City Hall was like 2.5.
I mean, the modeling did include the full CIP, so you're right. This 4 cents would be for all the CIP program that we have.
Where did the blue one go?
So just to quickly go down the through the months, the budget calendar. On December 12, we have a regular session for council budget guidance. January 10th is when the superintendent's budget presentation is to the school board. January 30th is the CIP presentation to Planning Commission. February 28th, school board budget recommendation. March 13, the city manager will present the budget to the city council to include the school board's budget recommendation. The 27th will be the first reading. April 10th will be the public hearing. And April 24th is the scheduled adoption of the budget. Second reading, second public hearing, and adoption of the budget. Just to summarize back what we've kind of gone through. So we're currently projecting a 3% revenue growth for $2.5 million. Known cost increases, including the WMATA, are $2.2 million, and this does include the PAYGO $600,000. But just again, to remind everybody, this is prior to considering any changes to compensation or additional programs that we may need. And as we've heard previously, we've identified capital needs, and this is just what's been adopted through FY 2017 of $145 million. And these present a significant challenge to our financial capacity. We will continue the community discussion on a shared vision for our capital programs and budget priorities over the next few months. And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you both for a great job, or all three of you for a great job. Do we have additional questions or comments? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. I know this will be a continuing discussion. And I guess we look forward to the rest of the further discussion.
I'm not sure how much we all look forward to this.
Sure. Vice Mayor Connolly has a comment.
And what's the vote?
I just, as the school board gets ready to leave this joint session, it occurred to me as we were sitting here that we've probably had a record number of joint school board and city council sessions this year, from January until December. I tried to count them as I sat here, but there were so many other numbers going around. So we're going to say it was at least 20. And we're really wrestling with some big issues. So I just want to tell everyone here that I appreciate how much we're really digging into these issues and looking at it from so many different perspectives, because I know that everybody in this room wants to do right by the city. So thank you all.
All righty. With that, why don't we go ahead and move on? Are our folks from school board going to head on out now? Are you guys, you're going to stick around?
Well, the other thing is, if you're a glutton for punishment, I think the next item up is the revision to the fiscal policy. Is that right?
Yeah, we're going to cover the fiscal policies which impact our ability to finance. So if you want to,
So you might want to stick around for that because it could be informative.
Let's go ahead and have a seat if you would. If you're going to be leaving, head on out the door. And let's go on to the next phase of our meeting, which is city fiscal policies. Mr. Shields, we will turn this on over to you, at least for the initial portion, and we want to hear from our chair of our Budget and Finance Committee, Ms. Oliver. But why don't you take the first stab at this, and then we'll go ahead and pass it on to...
Very good. We've been working hard with the Budget and Finance Committee. We've been beating these policies up and poking them and trying to make them better and responsive to what we need to accomplish here. The big setup, and I think everybody's heard the speech before, but these financial policies are really here to serve the city council and serve the city towards accomplishing your long-term goals. And so, you know, when it is important that the council buy into them as you consider these and ultimately adopt them. In the staff report, there's a summary of the major issues that we're trying to address. And the big picture is under, as we've discussed in the prior part of this meeting, under current policies, we will run up against those policies and trying to accomplish the major capital projects, and specifically the high school project. And so there's key things that we would point you to. At
Mr. Shields, I'm sorry, do you have a PowerPoint for this?
I do not have a PowerPoint.
Okay. I know, but it'd just be good for the public and everyone to have.
Yeah,
Well, those at home as well.
it is in the P drive.
Is it online?
I'll put it on. We're gonna put it up here on the board in just a moment. So I would point the council to line 186 of the policies. I'll give a quick summary, I think, of the key things for discussion. So at line 183, our policy, which has been on the books really since 2001 when the council first adopted fiscal policies, is that debt service shall not exceed 12% of general fund operating expenditures, including the school board budget and the general government operating budget. So we would add an additional provision that says that in the event that an extraordinary capital project requires debt service to exceed 12% of general fund operating expenditures, the city shall increase unassigned fund balance to 20% of general fund operating expenditures for any year in which debt service exceeds this policy. So this recommendation really comes from Davenport, and their view is that the 17% policy is a very normal policy. It is not extraordinary. The amount of debt that we are contemplating in our CIP is extraordinary, and therefore it would behoove us to take, if there's one thing that for us to do that would be meaningful to the rating agencies and to independent investors in the city, is to make to increase that resilience or that cushion for plans not working out according to as anticipated. And so that's really what that represents. We considered some different options for this. We've also had discussions with them about the fact that, yes, we're right now at 17.8% of expenses. That's where we ended the fiscal year.